Hello, and welcome to Minding Kingston's podcast, where we talk about mental health with people who live or work in the borough. I'm Vicky Bourne, and I work as the charity's counselling and wellbeing manager. In this edition,
we will all feel and experience difficult emotions and difficult experiences in our lives. That's part of being human, and recognising that our anger, our sadness, our frustration, these are natural emotional responses to the difficulties in our lives, and a happy, fulfilling life is about responding wisely to those, not pushing those away.
Mark Williamson is the co-founder and director of Action for Happiness, a mass participation movement focusing on creating a more balanced, collaborative society that concentrates less on consumption and material wealth and more on helping people and communities thrive. I started by asking Mark about his move from working in the corporate sector to something very different.
In terms of my background, yes, you're right. A slightly unusual journey towards working in the field of mental health and well-being. I was originally a scientist and engineer by academic training, did a PhD in electronics for my sins, and ended up in a commercial world working for large multinationals and financial services companies, doing some quite complicated business work, but also something that I found left me really unfulfilled and actually, with hindsight, very, very stressed and on the verge of some kind of breakdown, having spent 10 years working incredibly hard, but also not really tuning into my emotional life. I was close to breaking point, actually. And so that was the beginning of me realizing that my mental and emotional life mattered, but also that it had a big impact on my physical health and my ability to be a good husband, and then as I became a father, to be a good father. So I had a bit of a wake-up call to the fact that this stuff that you and your listeners know matters, that wasn't really on my radar for quite a while. And so I feel really grateful that I now have this opportunity to work, and have now worked for over 12 years in this area of mental health, well-being and happiness. But I feel also able to reflect on the fact that many people are dealing with situations that are causing great worries, stress, anxiety and challenges in their lives, whether that's their working life, like it was for me, or their relationships, or their general well-being. And actually, I feel that I have learnt over that period, from a scientist to a corporate man to now working in a charity, running a non-profit, but there are lots of things we can learn that really make a difference. They've certainly made a difference in my life, but also I've seen now for many years how much we can help people change their lives in really positive ways. So I'm excited to be sharing some of that with you today.
So you've used a metaphor of chasing up a ladder in the past, and I'm wondering if you can expand on this, and also how mindfulness was an enabler for change.
Yes, I think many of us do this, Vicky. We're in what you might call autopilot mode, or we're perhaps trying to fulfill the expectations we think the world has of us. And in my case, I had always tried to do well and get recognition and be praised, whether that's by parents or teachers, or then managers in a workplace. I was really a people pleaser. And so I was running fast up a ladder, was the metaphor I use, and trying to get to the next step and striving. And yet I hadn't really looked up to see which building the ladder was leaning against. And as I looked up, in my case, in this corporate environment, and I saw where I was heading and the people above me, I didn't see a sense of wanting to go in that direction any further. I saw, I felt a sense of emptiness, if I'm really honest. I felt that actually a lot of the promises of you'll be happy when you earn a certain amount of money, or you'll be happy when you have this recognition and status, they were sort of empty promises, actually. And I wanted something, and found I was seeking something with a greater sense of meaning, something that really contributed a bit more. So it was time to take the ladder off that building, find the correct building to lean it against, and then start climbing in a more positive direction. I'm not quite sure at which point this ladder metaphor breaks. But as you say, one of the things that really helped me was mindfulness. And I don't think I even called it that at that stage. So I had this experience of, well, I'm not saying I was a pioneer in any way, but when I first came across it, we were thinking about it in terms of just simple breathing exercises. And actually, perhaps the biggest wake-up call I had in my corporate life was an extreme experience of back pain. So I had what started as a sort of minor backache became an utterly debilitating sort of back condition where I could not get out of bed some days, and I was in constant pain for many years. I saw medics. I was diagnosed with having damaged disc and a damaged spine, and I was told I had a hereditary degenerative disease that could leave me in a wheelchair by the age of 40. I'm happy to say I'm now a decade older than that and still cycling hundreds of kilometres a week. So fortunately, that prediction didn't come true. But I realised, thanks in part to my wife, who was training to be an osteopath at the time, that she'd noticed there was a connection between my stress and my pain. And I was doing that classic, I guess you might say, British male thing of keeping things bottled up. I wasn't very good at talking about how I was feeling. I wasn't really tuned into my emotional state, and I was really bothered about doing well and being seen to do well, and that led to the pain that wasn't coming out emotionally, coming out in physical pain. And mindfulness was actually what broke that cycle. I learned these basic breathing exercises and was able to be more at peace with the pain I was experiencing. And actually, as many people who've practiced mindfulness will know, that when we accept the feelings we're having rather than trying to push them away, they become a little bit more manageable. And actually, over the space of a few weeks, really, I went from being in this chronic pain, unable to get out of bed, to actually walking again, and then playing tennis again and running again. And I would now call myself entirely pain-free when it comes to back pain. And mindfulness is a huge part of that and has become a big part of my daily life for over a decade since as well.
So tell us some more about the ethos underlying the Action for Happiness movement and how Action for Happiness came about.
Yes, so I had been reading a lot when I was struggling in this business world and realising I wanted to make a change. And one of the books I picked up back in 2004, I think, was a book called Happiness: Lessons from a New Science by Professor Richard Layard, who's an economist. He's also a member of the House of Lords and has become, over the years since, a great friend and also a mentor to me, and now also the chairman of the board of our charity, Action for Happiness. And this book really did change my life, because what Richard laid out was, with hindsight, a kind of call to action, but he really introduced the idea of the substantive science around happiness and well-being, and why this wasn't some sort of soft, fluffy, nice to have, or of course it is an emotional experience, but actually there's really hard evidence about the benefits of happiness and well-being. I guess I am, to some extent, a proof of some of the messages Richard was sharing. One, that there were things we can do to affect people's happiness. And also, I think that when we can help people feel happier, that they're better able to be not only physically healthy, but also contribute to society in various different ways. So he made a case as an economist that actually what we should aim for as a society is the greatest possible happiness and the least possible suffering. And although economic growth, which most economists focus on, plays a part in that, we all know that you need a certain amount of income to cover life's bare essentials, and that poverty is obviously a major source of unhappiness. And yet, when it comes to living a truly fulfilling and happy life, to really thrive, there's so much more that matters than our economic situation. And Richard's book was a blueprint for the things that also contribute beyond our economic situation, our relationships, our sort of sense of meaning and purpose, our inner mental health. He was one of the first economists to sort of make the economic case that we must take mental health really seriously, for no other reason, or at least for one very good reason, which is it causes a huge amount of cost to the UK. So with his economic hat on, he was able to say there is so much suffering that leads to lost hours at work, additional healthcare treatment required. So Richard's book was very powerful in terms of reaching policy people, but it also had a really big impact on me and many others. And in fact, what really led to the foundation of Action for Happiness was Richard and some collaborators he had, in particular Sir Anthony Seldon, who's a great educationalist and had been pioneering the teaching of happiness in schools, and also a man called Jeff Malgan, now Sir Jeff Malgan, who had been a senior strategic advisor to the Blair government and the founder of many great initiatives like Nesta, and he was the CEO of the Young Foundation. But he was really interested in social change and how you can build social innovation and actually change communities. And I came across this idea and became, to my great joy, ever since a sort of co-founder and the director of Action for Happiness. But I spotted an article by Richard Layard in the newspaper saying we need a movement for a change in our priorities. And it was soon after I'd completed an MBA. I was thinking about changing. Well, I knew I wanted to change away from my business life, and I didn't yet know what I was going to turn my attention to. And I had been working on environmental issues for a few years. And when I saw this article, I just knew this is what I had to do, because I had discovered in my own life the power of happiness and the importance of this shift in priorities. And so I met Richard, and this was back in 2010. Here we are now, I think nearly 14 years later, having created a charity which appears to be large, and many people would see the millions of followers that we have on social media and the now I think 650,000 members who've joined the Action for Happiness community. And yet it remains a tiny organisation. And I'm sure we can say a bit more about it. But the actual number of people behind the scenes and the amount of funding we have is tiny compared to most charities. But I think the reason it's reached so many people is because we've tapped into something that everybody wants. Everybody wants to understand what really makes for a good life, what really helps people thrive, but also to deal with the many adversities and challenges we have in our lives in a positive way. So I'd be very happy to talk about and explore any more of that, whatever's next on your mind.
Yeah, because dreadful though it was in so many ways, during the pandemic, people began to focus more on what they could do and what really mattered. A lot of what was highlighted were actually the core principles of Action for Happiness. And I was wondering if you could expand on what these are and how they can be put into practice.
Thank you. Yes, I think you're right to link this back to the changes we've seen in society recently, particularly the pandemic, because it was horrific for well-being and happiness in so many ways. We were disconnected from each other. We have led to a whole range of sort of knock-on issues for society, sort of ongoing increases in loneliness and social isolation. Particular young people's mental health is a major challenge post-pandemic. And yet I think there is also a major positive shift that has happened and remains, which is that more people are talking about their mental health and well-being. It's become central to conversations right across society. And as you were saying, we had a bit of a reset. We were woken up to the fact that actually maybe the most important thing isn't the way I spend my life every day, or what I have been focusing on, rushing around, trying to work. And of course, many of us have still had to work to maintain, our ability to provide for ourselves and our loved ones, especially in this cost of living crisis that's emerged. But I think we also woke up to some of the things that really matter for happiness. And so we have a framework, Vicky, which you'll be aware of, called the 10 Keys to Happier Living. I know you and others have done great work to spread the word about helping people learn about the skills behind that. And it also builds on something many of your listeners might be aware of, a framework called the 5 Ways to Wellbeing, which was developed, probably 15 years ago now. And the 10 Keys builds on that and really tries to present factors that are within our control, broadly speaking, that have a quite profound impact on our happiness and well-being. I won't go through all of them, but they include a couple of the things you've already mentioned. So obviously our relationships are foundational. So learning how to and taking time to really nurture our relationships with others. And that can be our nearest and dearest, but also our wider social contacts in our communities and workplaces. Obviously, our physical health matters. We know that anyway, but we forget often how much being active, being outdoors, being in green space has a profound impact on our mental health and our emotional state as well. That's another important key. You've talked or asked me already about mindfulness and this concept of being aware, being able to be here now, not in autopilot, not always worrying about the past or rushing towards the future, but actually cultivating this ability to be present, to really listen to people, to really notice what's going on for us in the moment. That's another important sort of life skill that I would love to see every child learning, all of us learning in our earliest years, because it's so foundational. And then there were things like, having a sense of meaning and purpose, really feeling that we're part of something bigger than just ourselves. Our modern individualistic culture hasn't done us any favours in terms of happiness. The more we think about me, and let go of the fact that we're part of something bigger, the more unhappy we can often become. So there are many ways that we find meaning. That might be our faith, it might be the projects we're involved in, our connection to the natural world, our desire to help others, this sort of pro-social activity we do. But we know that when we have something meaningful that we're working towards, it makes a huge difference. But the last one I'd bring out, and there are many more we could talk about, like resilience and sort of accepting ourselves as we are. But the other one I just wanted to hint at, because I think we'll come back to it, which is helping others. And often when we're thinking about our happiness, we tend to be initially thinking about it through quite a sort of self-focused lens, and that's understandable. But actually, even when we're struggling with our own well-being, it's amazing how beneficial it is to reach out and do something for someone else. There's this amazing reciprocity, this sort of virtuous circle that we have wired into us as humans, which is when we do good, we feel good. And then when we feel good, we're also more likely to care for others. So it becomes, instead of this sort of vicious cycle of fear and disconnection, which unfortunately modern society is encouraging, we get this virtuous circle of helping and then feeling better and then wanting to help more. And you will have seen this, I know, in your own work and in the people that you work with. But even just taking time to smile at a stranger, to check in with a neighbour, to share a friendly word in the supermarket, to check in with a colleague or someone who might be having a difficult time. These things obviously help the people that we're trying to help, and that's our main motive, but they also boost our well-being and help us remind ourselves that we're all part of this human species having a shared experience together, and how important that is, and how much we can send out these little ripples of positivity in the world around us. So that's a slightly long-winded answer to your reflection about the pandemic. I guess the other main thing that reminded us, and that Action for Happiness is all about, is that our actions make a difference. We found this out when we remembered to get outside more, and remembered to check in with the people around us, and we remembered to, take time away from work and look after our self-care and check in with our friends. We recognise that actually, when I make a small change, things do change. And in fact, actually, the only way that anything ever will change in our lives is when we begin with that first step. So actually, the fundamental ethos of Action for Happiness, as well as this idea of building a happier and kinder world, which is a big picture idea, changing society, it's also a tiny idea that actually what you do today, the small action you take, makes a difference. So I'd love to talk more about that and some of the actions that we're helping people take, really.
Restoring trust is something I'm really interested in, and is clearly a huge societal challenge at the moment. I particularly like the sessions about asking for help, which can be a very difficult thing to do, particularly in our rather isolated and individualistic culture.
So one of the things we've realised with Action for Happiness is that despite everything I've just said, changing behaviour is quite hard. There's a whole science of behaviour change. And one of the reasons that we survive in our lives is that we have habits, and we form habits that become subconscious. So we are not consciously aware of, reminding ourselves to breathe and do all those kind of physiological functions that we take for granted. But we're also often not very conscious of the habits we have wired in that affect our happiness and well-being, and the choices we make, and the way we respond to people, and the things we do in our daily lives. And so therefore, to change people's daily habits is hard, because you need to bring it into conscious awareness. You need to notice what you're already doing, and then you need to try and bring in something, or change something, or stop doing something, not only once, not only twice, but in a way that becomes lasting and actually becomes one of those habits that's then wired in and is part of our subconscious again. And I've experimented with this myself for many years, and I've managed to build in some habits like starting the day with meditation, like writing down things I'm grateful for at the end of each day, like regularly checking in with friends and seeing how they're doing, like making sure that I cycle to work, so I have a sort of built-in physical activity outdoors every day. But it's taken me years to learn more about myself, to build the changes in that work, and of course, along the way, trying lots of things that haven't worked for me. So one of the ideas I really like, Vicky, is the idea of sort of being a bit of a happiness scientist in our lives, that we can experiment and we can dabble with things and we can see what works for us, because we are all individual. Although those 10 keys that I've mentioned generally work, we aren't all the same. Some of us are morning people, some of us are evening people, some of us love having kind of little rules that we follow. Other people can't stand rules and don't like to-do lists and have other ways of remembering what they want to do in their lives. So I do think we need to have a self-awareness of what works for us and then experiment. And so one of the things that's been enormously successful with Action for Happiness is are calendars which have monthly themes and daily actions. And you can find out more about these at actionforhappiness.org, or you search for a happiness calendar. And just to tell the backstory, actually, Vicky, because it's rather lovely, in December, a few years ago now, probably at least 5 years ago, an Action for Happiness volunteer, a lovely man called Peter, who lives in Northamptonshire, came to me as we'd met each other. He'd been helping us with some work on schools, and he said, I've got this idea for a kindness calendar for December, an alternative advent calendar. It's just got a little act of kindness every day for the whole month, and I want to share it with my church community and mention Action for Happiness. Is that okay? And I had a look at it and thought, wow, this is a lovely idea. So I said, well, why don't we sort of make it look a bit more beautiful and turn it into an Action for Happiness resource, and we could share it with as many people as possible this December. So he shared it with his church community and we put it online. And I thought that was a nice idea, and I didn't really think it would necessarily go anywhere. And then the next day I had a call from our website company who said, well, there's good news and bad news, Mark. The good news is you're getting... the bad news is, your website's gone down. But the good news is it's because millions of people are trying to download your kindness calendar. And so we had discovered that this idea of a little daily action prompt was something people wanted, especially around this idea of kindness. So I thought, oh, well, that's nice. Let's do that every December from now on. That's clearly a thing that people will value at December. But we came to the end of the month and people said, what's the January calendar? And we got loads of people writing to us who are saying, please keep it going. Yeah, indeed, because January, of course, is a time of year when we want to set new intentions. We could talk a bit about intention setting if you like, because I think it's not just at January when there's an opportunity for us to have that fresh start effect. Actually, every new week, some would say every new day, we have an opportunity to start afresh. I like that idea. But anyway, so we created a January calendar for the following month, and people loved it, and it kept getting more and more engagement. And I'm happy to say that we are now, a few years on, not only do we have a programme of calendars all year round with a slightly painful but amusing, alliterating sequence of titles from Friendly February and Mindful March, Active April and Meaningful May, through to Self-Care September and all the gaps in between. These things have reached, we think, nearly 50 million people since we launched them. I have seen them in countless hospitals, school classrooms and corridors, workplace notice boards, fridges at home. I have people that have worked in investment banking or worked abroad or worked in the most unlikely of situations who've come and told me, like, oh, I saw your calendar in my workplace this week. So it's really struck a chord with people. Yeah, well, that's lovely to hear. And so I'm interested in why that's the case, because at one level, if anyone here knows about behaviour change, it shouldn't really work, because I don't think anybody's going to do an action every day, all month round and all year round. And actually, as we know, people don't like being told what to do. But I think what's going on with a calendar of daily actions, and there's simple little things, like take a different route today and see what you notice, or get in touch with an old friend you've not seen for a while. They're free and they're manageable and easily achievable, exactly as you say. And I think the message that you get when you see that calendar is a reminder that there are things that I can do, and little actions make a difference. So we've built on that, and what we've done is we've got a huge social media community where these actions get shared every day and millions of people engage with them. We also have an app, so you can find the Action for Happiness app on any of the main app stores. Yes, What's Good is an app that... Yes, that's right. There was a lovely app called What's Good created specifically around gratitude, which I still use every day. That's just a chance to write down good things each day. But we also have a more general Action for Happiness app where the actions are shared every day, and there were sort of inspiring nudges at the end of each day as well. And we have, I think I'm right in saying, 250,000 active users on the app. And it's a nice example of actually something else that I really wanted us to talk about if there's time in this conversation, Vicky, which is acting by yourself is all well and good, but actually much better things happen when we take action together. And so we have a phrase at the heart. Absolutely right. It's all about connecting. We have a phrase at the heart of Action for Happiness, which is happier, kinder, together. And that is really reflecting the fact that we can be happier. And also, one of the best ways to be happier is to be kinder to others and care about their happiness. But both of those things, Vicky, both our happiness and the happiness of others, are better done and better pursued together. So happier, kinder together is a reminder that happiness and kindness go hand in hand, but it's also a reminder that when we connect with other people, when we go on this journey with them too, amazing things happen. So on our app, for example, there are lovely teams of moderators that help connect with people. And whenever anyone shares anything that's going on in their lives, especially if they're struggling, the warmth, the love, the outpouring of help and connection they receive from the community it's just so beautiful, actually. It's the antithesis of what you would see on mainstream social media with the toxicity and the attacks. It's sort of like a friendly version of the social world, which I just always warms my heart. And then there are other ways people get involved. So we have these live events with amazing speakers from the world of well-being and further afield. They've included some huge names like the Dalai Lama, who's our patron, and people like Ruby Wax, who's done a huge amount on mental health, as you know, and mindfulness experts like John Kabat-Zinn, or emotional intelligence gurus like Dan Goleman. And, we had a fantastic professor of behaviour change, Professor Katie Milkman, recently. And so it's a mixture of expertise, but also sort of people who can share amazing, inspiring stories. We've hosted now more than 60 amazing guests. And what you get as well as the expert is you get to be part of an experience with other people. So thousands of people tune in live. They ask questions, they share insights with each other. There's a sense of community that's really important. And as you know, Vicky, we try to go one level deeper than that with community as well, because we also have local activities with Action for Happiness, local courses and local groups, and local opportunities for people to volunteer and get involved. And maybe we could talk a bit more about that. But I think that lesson number one for all of us is there are things we can do that make a difference. That's the action idea. But I think lesson number two, the deeper lesson, is that we need each other. And when we get together, something amazing happens.
Yeah, because I love running my local For Action Happiness groups. Every group is different, and I feel really lucky to meet amazing people who come along with such interesting stories to share, along with their expertise, of course. These 6-week courses are free and available in a variety of venues and mediums locally.
Yeah, thank you, Vicky. And I think what's going on here is that so many things in modern society sort of nudge us towards disconnection, or at least wearing a mask where we're not necessarily able to be our true, authentic selves. And so obviously, the pandemic and other things have led us to just be together less. And I think a big barrier we're still facing in society is something I'm calling like a social apathy, that we've become a little bit out of the habit of getting together with others in person and forgetting how valuable that is. And also, so much of the social interaction we do now, especially when it's done online, is slightly fake. It's here's my perfect image, my chosen selfie, here's my curated feed of the things I'm up to, but it's really only the bits I want to share with you. And that's fine. We've always, as long as humans have existed, we've had a sense of projecting who we'd like to be seen as. There's a sort of defense mechanism within that. It's, we can't reveal our inner selves and our darkest secrets to everyone, but we do need to share our real selves with people that we trust in our lives. And of course, we do that with our loved ones when we can, but it's really helpful to have a group of like-minded people where you feel safe enough to talk about what's really going on in your life, to let go of the, isn't the weather nice, and how are the kids, and some of the sort of friendly but slightly superficial things we say, and actually get into the how are you? What's really going on? Oh, and gosh, that sounds difficult. How much you
have in common, I think, with what's going on.
Yeah, so there's the commonality of interest, but there's also the commonality of challenges. It's like, oh gosh, yeah, I see now that other people are struggling in the way that I do. And one of the things I find so powerful whenever I'm in a small group of people talking about happiness and well-being, is that you see a sort of almost, I won't say common suffering because that sounds too downbeat, but actually we all have struggles in our lives, and happiness isn't about either pretending those don't exist or having a perfect struggle-free life. That's just naive. And we will all feel and experience difficult emotions and difficult experiences in our lives. That's part of being human. And recognizing that our anger, our sadness, our frustration, these are natural emotional responses to the difficulties in our lives. And a happy, fulfilling life is about responding wisely to those, not pushing those away. And I find that's easier to do in a group when somebody else is saying, I've had a really rubbish week. I'm really struggling with my partner right now. My work is so stressful, or whatever it might be. I've just had a diagnosis. I'm really worried about someone. When someone else is brave enough to sort of share that in a space that feels open and safe, something really magical happens, because people stop sort of competing with each other and start really listening to each other and saying, I hear you. That sounds hard. Actually, this is how I feel right now. And we can't fix each other's problems, but actually it turns out, Vicky, that what we want when we share with people, we don't want our problems fixed. We want to feel heard. And again, too many of us, myself included, it took me years to learn this, that when someone is sharing something with us, they don't want to be fixed. They don't want us to tell them what we think the answer is. They want us to say, I hear you. It sounds to me like what you're saying is this. Is that right? And really just check in with people and make sure we've heard them. That active listening, as they sometimes call it. And it's amazing how much calmer we feel and how much more connected we feel when we feel really heard. So much of what we're doing, I think, in life is an attempt to feel heard and valued as we are. And these groups give us an opportunity to practice the skill of hearing each other, but also practice the skill of being brave enough to share something more about our real selves. And that, I think, is a foundation for good mental health.
Yeah, because there's a lot out there we can't control, but there are also many small things that can really make a difference. And the takeaway can be a whole new group of friends, as well as everything they've hopefully learned along the way.
Yes, thank you. You're absolutely right. The forming new connections and friendships is so important, and groups give us a chance to do that. I'd like to, in a moment, just come back to the really important point you made about control, though, because there's something we haven't touched on there that's really interesting. But just while we've been talking about the groups, if anybody listening to this would like to find out more, you can go to actionforhappiness.org/groups and find groups near you. If you are in the Kingston area, you're particularly lucky, because Kingston Adult Education and Vicky and others provide these extra sort of courses on a regular basis that don't happen to always be available in other parts of the country. So that's brilliant. And you can also, if you'd like to be sort of involved more in helping to make things happen locally, we have an online volunteer training program. It's a short, simple, free 4-day, it's run over 4 days. It doesn't take that long. It's just a sort of half an hour a day training program that helps you learn more about Action for Happiness and helps you learn some of the skills to help bring people together locally. So do check out actionforhappiness.org/volunteer if you'd be interested to find out more about that. And then there's a chance to run either a fixed term course. We have a course called Happiness Habits, which runs for 6 weeks as a fixed term thing, or to run an ongoing group. We have quite a few actually in the Kingston area that meet monthly, as well as the adult education groups that Vicky is involved in. So that's something that I hope people might listen to, but and go and follow up on. But Vicky, you mentioned control, and two things strike me from that. One is we think often about our core needs that we have as human beings, and we think about the physical needs for food and for shelter and for safety, and we overlook the fact that we have core psychological needs. And there's a very important piece of research work here called self-determination theory that sort of shows what are the needs that we, in order to sort of feel motivated and to make progress in life, which psychological needs need to be met. And we've talked about two of them already. One is a sort of sense of mastery and making progress. That's where the action taking comes in. Like, I feel like I've learned a new thing. I've done something differently in my life. And another is a sense of relatedness, feeling connected to others. We've just been talking about that. But the other vital psychological need is for something called autonomy. It's to feel like we have some agency in our lives, that what we do matters and makes a difference. And actually, I think a lot of us are feeling a bit sort of trapped, or feeling a bit that we can't do much about our situation sometimes. I think particularly in COVID, and particularly in a pandemic situation, but also in a financially challenged situation, a cost of living crisis. It feels like our options are reduced. We've got less choice. We can't really, it's really hard, you're right. And so I'm really interested in how can we help ourselves discover a greater sense of agency. And so I think the most fundamental life skill actually that we could learn for ourselves, or we can help others learn, and I again think we should be teaching all our children, is the foundation of cognitive behavioural therapy, which some of you will be aware of if you're listening to this, but it's also the foundation of, in many ways, ancient Greek philosophy, Stoicism and so on, and has been most beautifully written about in a book called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, who was, in case you don't know, was in Auschwitz, was in the most horrific concentration camp situation where, there was death and destruction all around him. And his quote was, "Everything can be taken from a man, or indeed a woman, but one thing, the last of human freedoms, the ability to choose our own attitude in any given circumstances." And so what Viktor Frankl is saying that is almost no matter how bad the situation we find ourselves in, we still have one thing, always, that no one can take away, and that's our ability to choose how we respond. We can't change the situation, but we can choose how we respond. He says, between stimulus and space and response, there is a space, and in that space lies our choice. So I find this really inspiring. If I'm in a situation where somebody has done something awful to me, I can't change what they've done. I can't change the thing, but I can choose what I do, or indeed don't do as a result of that. And it doesn't mean we're condoning bad behaviour. It doesn't mean that we're letting go of the problems of the world. Actually, it means we're recognising that we have a certain amount of control over how we respond. And when we use that control, we not only make things better, but we also feel that autonomy. We're like, well, I can choose to ignore what that person said, or I can choose to move on, or to try a different route, or to change something. It's so inspiring to see people recognising that they have this sort of inner power to make even just very small changes that they perhaps didn't realise they have, and how life-changing that can be.
Okay, so we've talked about how people can get involved, volunteering or joining groups. And there's a great 10-day programme that gets particularly promoted at the beginning of the year, but you can actually do it at any time.
Thank you, Vicky. I'm glad you've tried it out. It's a free 10-day interactive programme that, as you say, can be done on a phone, but it can also be done on the computer. It's 10daysofhappiness.org. That's all one word, 10daysofhappiness.org. And we've had, I think, about 150,000 people have now taken that programme. There's evidence that shows that even just doing this for a few minutes a day for 10 days by yourself has a meaningful and measurable impact on people's well-being. And at the end, it then encourages you to get more involved with others. But it goes through these 10 keys, and each day shows you a practical skill you learn through a video on screen with a sort of online coach called Abby. You learn a practice, and you do the practice together with Abby, and then you can go away and put that into practice during your day. And I think I've done the programme maybe 20 times now, Vicky. I did it at the start of this year again. And I find that even though I know this world so well and have tried for years to build these habits into my life, I still find it really helpful to get a reminder, to get a nudge, because of course habit formation and doing the good things isn't about a one-off. We don't clean our teeth every day for a few years and then say, right, I'm done with teeth cleaning now, that's me, because that would lead eventually to tooth decay and problems. We should be taking our mental health as seriously as our dental health, and making this a daily practice. So I would encourage people who've not tried the 10 days to give it a go. But if you have done it before, give it another go, because I find it helps me keep these ideas alive in my daily life.
So finally, Mark, a question that I ask all my guests, and you're local to the area, is whether that you have a favourite place that you like to go to and relax and unwind, somewhere really dear to your heart.
I love that question, and I've never actually been asked that before. And of course, speaking to an audience that may also have roots in Kingston, I risk my answer sounding a little bit obvious. But for me, it's the park. It's the park, and I can think of very specific bits of Richmond Park. But I cycle through it every day. Well, no, let me get this right. Either 5 or 6 days a week, I will go through the park at least once, often twice on a bicycle, and often with the dog walking as well. But for me, it's actually the bit where I've come down from Richmond Gate heading towards Roehampton, and then I often turn up towards the ballet school on the hill there. And as I turn towards that hill, I can see the hill rising ahead of me, and there's sort of green space to the left, and sometimes there's deer ahead. But just looking up at that, and there's often a blue sky on a nice day, and it's just I've often stopped there and taken a photo and thought, aren't I lucky to have this on my journey to work? So that's a very special place for me. I also love just being down by the river. That I walk my dog down at Canbury Gardens most morning, regularly, and just seeing friendly faces and being down there and having a sort of the familiarity of somewhere near water and seeing just daily life, seeing other dog walkers, seeing the rowing club and the rowers out on the river, seeing people, having a friendly chat, the little cafe there, the bandstand where I've been involved in singing in local choir events, and I've seen, brass bands play, and it's an area where there's picnics in the summer, which I have to keep my dog away from because he tries to eat all the kids' picnics. But there's a lot to be said there in just those examples about green space and togetherness and daily rituals and community is a healer and nature is a healer, Vicky. And I think I would imagine that many people's spaces in Kingston, when they think of their favourite spaces, are green spaces, and we're so lucky to have so much of that around us.
Yes, well, as you say, there's lots of green spaces in the locality, so we're really lucky. Well, thank you so much for coming along today, Mark, and telling us more about Action for Happiness and how people can get involved, both locally as part of groups or more generally as a part of a mass movement. There'll be a lot more details accompanying this podcast.
Well, thank you, Vicky. I'm really delighted you asked me to do this, and it's been lovely to talk to you. And I just wanted to end really by talking about this again, just briefly, at both the personal and the sort of global level. And so at a personal level, we can make a difference in our lives. We can be happier. We can help the people around us. We can spread these little ripples. And what we all really want, I think, is a happier and kinder world. It's a scary time right now, Vicky. There are so many forces heading us in the wrong direction, leading to disconnection, leading to conflict, leading to misunderstanding, leading to polarization, leading to unhappiness, anxiety, uncertainty. And so it might feel at one level that happiness is a bit glib and a bit irrelevant. And I feel very strongly that it's the opposite. I think this is needed now more than ever for all of us in dealing with our daily lives, but it's also the cultural shift that we need in our world. That when we recognise that what really matters isn't power, isn't money, isn't possessions, what it matters is a kind of deep sense of meaning and connection to other human beings, and to care about all beings and take all life and give and recognise the preciousness of life. That's what really leads to a fulfilling life, and actually then is the solution and the step towards peace and understanding and togetherness rather than polarization, and a sense of trust and safety as opposed to fear and uncertainty. So when we do this work, when we try and create a happier and kinder community and world around us, we're doing it for ourselves. Yes, we're doing it for the people around us, but we're also contributing to a shift in the culture towards something that the world needs more than ever right now. So please do join us at actionforhappiness.org, and let's make a happier and kinder world together.
I was speaking there to Mark Williamson, Director of Action for Happiness. Before we go, do have a listen out to the other chats in this series. You can find them wherever you usually download your podcasts. And we'd be grateful if you subscribed and left a review too. It all helps to spread the word. I'm Vicky Bourne of Mind in Kingston, and until the next time, take good care.